sorry, you probably can't read this. I didn't write very big. But we did Acts chapter 13 and 14. And this is where Paul and Barnabas were sent forth from their church in Antioch and went out into various places. So we saw a lot of going. We saw them going intentionally to places where they knew people had not yet heard the gospel. So they went specifically to Seleucia and Cyprus, and I guess my map is hiding these places, or I'm hiding the map, right? But they went to Seleucia, Cyprus, and Salamis, and they went specifically into the synagogues where the Jews were gathered, where they knew they would have people to hear, that would want to hear the message. And then they further went to Perga, Pamphylia, Antioch of Pisidia, over Asia Minor, and Iconium, and they went to various synagogues, but it also notes that they went to the Gentiles, and they took the message of the gospel specifically, not just to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles. And then they made a little tour, and they also went back to the places that they had visited in the first time. So there were a lot of good examples of going, but then second of all, we saw examples of them giving the gospel to people everywhere that they went. In Salamis, they met the Roman governor, official, whatever he was, Sergius Paulus, and they preached the gospel to him. In fact, he actually wanted to hear the gospel from them. So that shows that they were having an impact. Word was spreading around the city that, you know, these guys are preaching this message. And there are other examples of them preaching everywhere they went. But in chapter 13, there's an extended sermon by Paul, which is really good. It kind of gives all the elements of the gospel in it. Paul preached the gospel in Antioch of Pisidia, and he talked specifically about Jesus Christ, who he was. He was the son of David. He was given in fulfillment of the promises of God, that he was crucified and died upon the cross, and then God raised him from the dead. And after his resurrection, it was a physical resurrection, and there were many witnesses that saw him during that period. And in addition, Paul says, thank you, that if you believe on Jesus Christ, then you will receive forgiveness of sins and God's righteousness. But he also gave them a strong warning about the consequences of not believing. So after that, there were further examples of him and Barnabas preaching in the various cities they went. Then, third of all, the growing. We saw a number of people responding and believing the gospel, Sergius Paulus and other people. After his sermon in Pisidia, the Gentiles wanted to hear too. And so there were people believing, there were people wanting, maybe not believing, but wanting to hear more. Likewise, in chapter 14, we saw that in Lystra, they did a miracle, they healed a man, and the people responded, but not quite in the right way, because they had some misunderstandings. They tried to worship Paul and Barnabas as gods, and so Paul and Barnabas had to correct their misunderstanding, but we consider that's part of the growing, the part of teaching people and trying to ground them in the truth. And then gathering, they gathered the converts together, and Paul and Barnabas went back and visited them and encouraged them. In terms of guiding, we had various examples of that. Really from the beginning of chapter 13, Paul and Barnabas were working, ministering in their church at Antioch even before they went to other places. They were teaching believers, they were encouraging believers, and we saw that throughout the process. But then also at the end of chapter 14, it says specifically that they appointed elders to serve as leaders in the various churches that they formed. We also saw examples of abiding and persecution, if you'd like to hear more details.